So on to our ending keynote, let me please introduce our President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, Fred Kempe, without whose support we could not have even attempted to pull off a crazy event like this. So thank you all for staying with us. Thank you all for staying here to meet Secretary Work. Fred.
Great. So good to see you all. This was an exciting day, different day. Everyone from demographers to skunkworks to DARPA to now fiction writers signing their books in the outside. This is partly about trying to figure out how we think about the future differently, how we stretch the way we imagine the future and then respond to it. But at the same time, we're trying to do the same thing at the Atlantic Council. And so give us your feedback, give us your ideas. We know that we have to reach people differently today than we used to, and we're going to have to reach people much differently in the years ahead. So we'll keep experimenting with new formats, keep experimenting with how we reach people also online. So those of you online who want to feedback, please do. I'm Fred Kempe. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and it's my pleasure to introduce this final session. When you think you're going to do an exciting, symbol crash to end the day, and then someone says it's going to be entitled the third offset strategy, you pause for a moment and you say, well, what does the third offset strategy have to do with the conjunction between art and strategy and the art of future warfare, which is what we've been talking about here so much. And you're going to hear about that. The forward thinking that we're talking about is the core of the Atlantic Council's mission, and it's a theme that runs throughout our programming. Our strategy initiative, which organized today's forum, seeks to help the United States work with its allies and partners to lead an increasingly complex and turbulent world. Our cyber initiative looks at how to keep cyber realms safe as we approach the Internet of Things. Our strategy foresight initiative looks at global trends and projects of what our future environment will look like. This is all inside the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. And then the focus of the discussion to come is from our Art of Future Warfare project. And thanks to the exciting work of Project Director August Cole and Lund Fellow Steve Grunman, we have cultivated a community of creatives, including many in Los Angeles, to use fiction, narrative, and art to push the boundaries of what we imagine our future to look like. In trying to change the conversation in DC, we bring new and innovative thinkers to join the national security conversation and break out of the inside the Beltway mentality. You not only saw one speaker talk and speak of love on the same stage where we talked about Lockheed Skunk Works, but you also saw Max Brooks talking to an audience. I'm not sure how often he comes to town, talking about the way he looks at things as well. In this spirit, I think to have Deputy Secretary Work here is absolutely right. He said last November, quote, "Great power competition has returned. That requires us to think more globally and in terms of competition than we have in the last 25 years. As a result of the U.S. preponderance of power during the 1990s and 2000s, our strategic muscles atrophied," unquote. So we're going to try to unatrophy, if that's a word. August, you can edit that out. That's what we're going to try to do in this session. An important example of how we're trying to accomplish this bringing together of art and strategy has been in engaging one of the country's most important leaders, Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work. For the past few months, August has been working with the Pentagon on how we can use art and specifically fiction and science fiction to better understand what has become the third offset strategy to promote strategic innovation. For those of you who are not familiar with this initiative, it is what former Secretary Hagel described as, quote, "an ambitious department-wide effort to identify and invest in innovative ways to sustain and advance America's military dominance for the 21st century," unquote. We're going to listen in on a conversation between August and Deputy Secretary Work about what the third offset strategy means in a practical sense, the objectives it seeks to accomplish, and how art can help the Defense Department achieve these goals. For those joining us online, August will also announce the winner of our latest creative contest, so stay tuned. I'm not going to break the news here, just to say, August, Go Army. For those of you who are not familiar with this contest, earlier this year, based on prompts that we developed with the Deputy Secretary's staff, we asked writers to creatively explore the third offset through short stories, fictional doctrine, and even visual art. The winner for the best written entry, as judged by Max Brooks, received $500. It's not going to necessarily be the price of a Hollywood script, but it's not a bad start. And the best visual entry will also get the same amount, and on that I'll just say, go Navy. You're going to hear that news in a moment. Award-winning science fiction writers Linda Nagata, IO9 editor Andrew Liptak, and author Chris Martin were the preliminary judges, along with August. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work. He's been a key driving force behind Secretary Ash Carter's push for the Department of Defense to embrace new technologies and creative thinking through the third offset since his appointment in 2014. The Daily Beast called him, quote, one of the few defense experts in Washington who think strategy first and weapons second. On the one hand, I really like that quote, but on the other hand, I don't like the one of the few defense experts, because you really wish a great many more would think strategy first and weapons second. His extensive experience includes, and I have to say this or else my colleagues over at CNAS would not speak to me again, Chief Executive Officer of the Center for New American Security, Under Secretary of the Navy 2009 to 2013. He is a modest man who asked me to keep his introduction short, so I'm going to do that. Mr. Deputy Secretary, it's an honor to host you, and I can't think of very many prominent government figures have chose to engage the public on the intersection of art and national security. It's truly one of a kind event, and we're proud to host it here at the Atlantic Council. August, turn it over to you and Deputy Secretary Work.
So you can tell that Fred has a journalism background because he can't help breaking a little news. It's an honor to be here with Deputy Secretary Work. You know, one of the Art of the Future project's missions is to take this conversation about the future of conflict and the future international security environment to a broader audience. And there are real reasons to do so, because no one organization anymore has a monopoly on good ideas or a monopoly on innovation. With that in mind, I'm going to announce the winners of our most recent contest, which was cued to many of the applied questions behind the third offset strategy. Our short story was won by Jason Hansa for a piece titled Pure Risk. It's a contest-winning entry that focuses on the implications of undersea unmanned autonomous vehicles after a conflict with China. It's posted at our website, theartofthefuture.atlanticcouncil.org. A little bit about Major Hansa, who is currently a doctrine writer at Fort Lee. He has served in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he's recently deployed, but also in South Korea and Germany. You know, to have such competitive writers coming to the project with ideas that really emphasize the human element of technology that we're trying to define in a policy sense is, I think, one of the more helpful things that we can do out there. Our visual art was won by a Navy lieutenant, as Fred said. It's called Legend of Legends of Legend. And that was Kristen Wheeler. And Kristen is currently also out in Silicon Valley at the Navy Innovation Advisory Council. She has an operational background experience at sea, but also in Afghanistan on a PRT. So somebody who's both at the forefront, but also is operationally rooted. We want to thank our judges again, and also for the council for supporting the prizes that go with this. To begin our conversation, you've seen some of the art that we've assembled today. We're actually going to watch a 2-minute short video that really gets at some of the core questions around swarm warfare, crowdsourcing of intelligence, and automation on the battlefield. It's from Ant Farm, which is a story in the free anthology we published last year that is available at the project's website. And I'd commend, for those of you who are trying to find a bit more of insight into the future of many of the technologies that are inside the third offset strategy. If we can roll the video for 2 minutes, then we'll begin our conversation.
Solid gold. Snakebite requests area fire mission. Firewalker. Insurgent convoy 1 click from their position on exfil route. Confirm.
Solid Gold, Ant Farm confirms snakebite priority support. Firewalker is in queue. Stand by. Firewalker is green. Waiting Cloud 9.
Ant Farm snakebite requests immediate fire mission. Weapon release authority cleared.
Negative, Solid Gold. We need minimum 60% to make this clean. Stand by, Cloud 9.
Ant Farm solid gold. Now confirmed FIC. Showing 37 targets now closing on foot.
Solid Gold, Ant Farm can service the target once I'm free and clear from Cloud 9. Current target fidelity is only 12%. Solid Gold, Ant Farm initiating Cloud 9 lockout. Firewalker TOT 2 mics to target. Stand by for weapons free. Make sure snakebite suited up. Solid Gold, Ant Farm. Did you call for a blizzard mission? Negative, Ant Farm. Threat is neutralized. Solid Gold, Ant Farm aircraft system compromised. System compromised. Hard kill all nodes. Hard kill.
So a dark ending to that story, but it's an important way to visualize a discussion that you could have otherwise in a rather dry way about many of the technologies and themes on there. We're going to keep this conversation animated and casual, talking about everything from how we are literally able to show versus tell the third offset, but also talking about some of the inspirational elements out there that are available for trying to get better clarity into some of these kinds of technological questions. So I'll begin with a kind of very basic open-ended question that, when you visualize what the third offset actually looks like in the future, what do you see and how do you arrive at that vision?
Well, first of all, the third offset is really kind of simple at its core. It basically hypothesizes that the advances in artificial intelligence and autonomy, autonomous systems, is going to lead to a new era of human-machine collaboration and combat teaming. Collaboration is using the tactical acuity of a computer to help a human make better decisions, and human-machine combat teaming is using manned and unmanned platforms. Now, I think when most people hear me talk about this, they immediately start to think of Skynet and Terminator. A sentient machine that suddenly now can rewrite its own code, make its own decisions, and essentially lock out human intervention, and then killer robots that roam the battlefield. I think more in terms of Iron Man. The ability of a machine to assist a human, where the human is still in control in all matters, but the machine makes the human much more powerful and much more capable. And I think of it in terms of Ender's Game, where commanders distant from the battlefield are able to control unmanned systems, but it is clearly the human in control. So when I visualize these things, I tend to move away, although I really enjoy the movies in which the machines are sentient. I tend to focus in on movies and books that see how machines, the collaboration between human machines, really is in an advanced stage in the future.
So what are you watching or reading that is helping inform that?
Well, one of my favorite book series is Bolos, which are enormous fighting machines that are sentient, but they have a human commander in the cockpit. And it's the interplay between this very, very intelligent machine and the human, which I find to be fascinating, where the human provides a moral aspect to what the machine is doing. Otherwise, the machine would just go through its autonomous logic and start to go. I really like John Ringo and the way he talks about battle suits and how those battle suits empower humans. David Weber and all of his naval. I'm a big science fiction fan, and I believe exactly in what you're doing. Science fiction allows you to kind of imagine these cases where human and machines collaborate in a sense that is just well beyond what we see today.
There's this Frederick Pohl quote that we often bring up at our events, which is science fiction is really, I'm going to butcher it slightly, but really great at not predicting the automobile, but the traffic jam. You know, when you're talking about using the human as the ultimate decider in some of these, with these future technologies, but aren't we at a point, particularly with cyber or some of the really advanced battle networks, where you and I couldn't respond fast enough? And so you are at some point going to have to turn over authority, moral or legal.
Well, you used a term that's very, very important, battle networks. Battle networks are extremely easy to understand. They're three interconnected grids. A sensor grid, which tells you what's going on in the environment, as you saw up there. A command, control, communications, and computers, an intelligence grid, which tries to make sense of what's happening, where red forces are, where blue forces are, what effects you want to achieve on the battlefield, and then an effects grid, something that allows you to achieve those effects. So we're already in a situation, A2AD, anti-access area denial, is shorthand for network-on-network warfare. So when you hear the Department of Defense talking about anti-access area denial, it's when your battle network collides against another one. Both of them are able to fire guided munitions at advanced ranges. Both of them are able to get a good sense on what's happening in the environment. Anything that generally can be seen can be hit. And so the whole idea of battle networks is extremely important. And what the third offset says is, how do you put learning machines, AI, autonomous systems into the network to allow your network to prevail over an enemy's network?
So there's the strategic end, which is deterrence, particularly with China and Russia. One of the challenges, though, and this is something you even see in Washington defending a program on the Hill, it's hard to protect something you can't see. For example, if you're a lawmaker. Narrative is crucial to deterrence as well, understanding the true potential or something, but also having enough doubt. How do you reconcile the need to create a narrative around third offset that gives it a credible technological efficacy, but also holds enough back so that an adversary doesn't actually understand what might be waiting for them?
Well, it's a very important point. Let me just say a little bit about third offset strategy first, this weird term that I've taken a lot of grief over because, I mean, what the heck, where did you get this? You know, before I became the deputy secretary, the confluence of strategy and technology and operations was something that I was absolutely certain I would focus on when I was the deputy secretary. So I talked with a bunch of people that I really respected, Bill Perry, Paul Kaminsky, and they were the ones who actually had said, this is what the first offset strategy was, this is what the second offset. So I really like the third offset because I like historical progression and I like to be able to explain how these things are different. Offset really is, we're not going to try to, you know, compete with the Chinese or the Russians or any other competitor, tank for tank, airplane for airplane, ship for ship. We're going to try to offset their advantages. And then the strategy, this is very important, in addition to trying to figure out how these technologies will change the way we operate to gain an operational advantage at the campaign level, at the operational level of war, it's as much a competitive strategy in that it's going to be a world where most, I think you heard earlier today, R&D is going down in the public sector, but it's going up in the private sector. Most of the things that have to do with AI and autonomy are happening in the private sector. And so all competitors are going to have access to it. It's going to be a world of fast followers. You're going to have an instance where you're not going to be able to have a lasting advantage. So you have got to configure yourself to be very agile and very nimble. So I like the fact that, you know, that it's a historical based. We offset advantages that our adversaries have, and it's a strategy not only technologically, but competitively. So when you are in this competitive environment, what we say is you reveal to deter and you conceal for warfighting effectiveness. And I'll give you a perfect example from the second offset strategy. Everybody today thinks the second offset strategy, which was really going after conventional guided munitions and the battle networks that would employ them, that stealth was part of that. And in hindsight, indeed it was. But what we revealed in a demonstration called Assault Breaker was our ability to look deep and be able to engage deep with conventional weapons and achieve the same destructive effects as we would have achieved if had we employed tactical nuclear weapons. It completely unsettled the Soviets. By 1984, the Soviets said, oh my gosh, if the United States and the NATO allies get this right, they'll be able to stop our attack without resorting to tactical nuclear weapons. It completely unsettled their deterministic models, and I think it undoubtedly contributed to conventional deterrence. We did not reveal stealth until 1989. We felt if there was, God forbid, an attack between the Soviet Union and the United States had to respond, that would have been a potentially war-winning advantage that we had concealed. So this is a very important part of the competitive strategy. And we have to think a lot harder of what we reveal, and we want to reveal things that we think will deter our adversaries. And we will conceal things that we believe will give us a warfighting advantage if we do collide, and hopefully allow us to end the conflict quickly on our own terms.
My hope is that we can keep those kinds of things secret, but my worry is that we are in a world where there is great transparency because of advanced persistent threat from cyber spying, and that unless this is being kind of written on pad and paper in a desert, isolated facility, so much of this is known already because in part it comes from the commercial sector. So how do you mitigate that advantage?
It's really tough. It's something we talk about all the time. We actually have a group of people that we work on a thing, it's LOE 5. It's line of effort number 5, and it's on information management. And it really says, how do we get ahead of this? We're generally not that good at it, quite frankly. So we want to get a lot better. And we want to roll the clock back and say, what were some of the lessons we learned when we were in a really hard competition with a great power during the Cold War, and how did we handle it that way? It is going to be harder because of the cyber environment, but we do believe that there are going to be things that we can conceal, or at least confuse our enemies over.
How much time do we have to get it right?
It's a good question. In the second offset, the first conventional guided munition was employed in 1943. So the Germans fired an acoustical homing torpedo, and then that was in May. And in September that year, they dropped a radio-controlled bomb, essentially the first JDAM, but with a different guidance package. And we had guided munitions from 1943 all the way up until 1975. We dropped 28,000 guided munitions over Vietnam alone. And then, of course, there was the Yom Kippur War, which brought in a whole lot. Well, in 1975, the United States says we are going to go after conventional guided munitions as a national priority. And when we went to war 15 years later in Desert Storm, only about 200 or 250 airplanes in the entire inventory were wired for guided munitions. So these things take a long time. What I worry about and what we're trying to think about in the department is we don't think we have that much time. Things are much more like the interwar period, where everybody had access to radios, everybody had access to mechanization, everyone knew that there were airplanes and all sorts of things were happening. But only the Germans put everything together into an operational concept called Blitzkrieg. Now, we were all fast followers. As soon as we saw it, we all said, God, why didn't we think of that? And by 1944, we were out blitzkrieging the Germans. We think this is going to be much more a dynamic environment where technological surprise is going to be endemic, and it's going to be the adversaries and the competitors who they're surprised, they figure it out. Additive manufacturing, they change things, they go after different ways, they establish new ways to order business. It's going to require new commanders, the way we train our commanders. It's going to require new operational concepts and organizational constructs. So, as I said, it's an exciting time. And a lot of the stuff that you read in science fiction is actually, people have been thinking about this for quite some time, and you can learn very interesting things and going through this. It helps, as you say, explain to the average American, in this case, our third offset really isn't about the Terminator, really isn't about Skynet. It's more about, you know, an Iron Man, which is helping the human.
The element, though, that seems hardest to overcome is almost the organizational and cultural one, potentially. Whether it's buying things fast enough before they go out of date, or coming up with reading lists at West Point that have bolos on them. I mean, how do you push that down into organizations so that they are acting with the same haste that you see this? Because the enterprise you're working with is so big and has so many day of priorities. The inbox is full.
Well, the big thing, a lot of people try to create little, they think they can have line charts that get your way into more innovation. I just don't believe that. It really is a cultural shift. It has to be top-down driven. You really, really, really have to push it. You have to organize yourself to think about this temporally, because you are not going to have these long periods where you're going to have an advantage. And that's why Secretary Carter, when he was the Deputy Secretary, put together a thing called the Strategic Capabilities Office. For the first 5 years, it's really, well, what's out in the Department of Defense that we could just use differently, or we could put new software in it to make it smarter, more capable, more autonomous. And so the SCO really focuses on those first 5 years. Our Rapid Capabilities Offices focus on what we call the second and third 5-year defense plans, so say 10 to 15 years out. And then DARPA, our Defense Advanced Research and Projects Agency, our DD, our ASD, our Assistant Secretary for Research and Development, they're really focused on farther out. So you organize yourself and you're constantly pushing, and you put incentives in for people to do things quickly. So the way we will shoot for this is we'll have a panel where the services come up and say, hey, we would like to experiment with this. And if it is something that makes the third offset go, we will help them. We will help them say, oh, you need another 500 million? Well, we're going to give you the 500 million. So it's all about incentivizing, getting the leaders to really buy in for the need for change. And it's difficult. Normally, in a situation like this, there's a concept called the defining battle. So we had been talking about the second offset for 15 years, but I still remember it, and I think probably many in here. The thing I remember that day is General Schwarzkopf saying, this is the luckiest Iraqi in Iraq. And it showed a car driving across the bridge, and a laser-guided bomb came right behind the car, cut the bridge, and the car sped up and got away. Didn't hurt the people in the car, but it cut the bridge. Every single American, I think, in that moment said, whoa, right. I get this. So without a defining battle, and God forbid, I'm not saying I hope I have a defining battle, what you have to do is do demonstrations and exercises. So what can we do like we did with the assault breaker? How can we show our senior leaders, and it really is our senior leaders, because the young leaders get this.
So they get it. They play the video games. So you're really then talking about convincing a cadre that's invested in a status quo. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense necessarily, but you're talking about convincing them and showing them.
Yeah, and I think the way this works is the head of AI, I think, I'm pretty sure it's the head of AI at Facebook, but it might be Google. And he said, look, when you have an organization, the older people, the older generations, they generally have innovation on things they know. The younger generation comes up and they're willing to do innovations in things they don't know. They're willing to experiment and say, this doesn't work. Well, here's where it works for us. The senior leaders in the department are the only ones who remember how to do large-scale combined arms warfare. Right. So what we have to do is convince them, hey, what's Airland Battle 2? And then we have to convince the young lieutenants and the captains, okay, you're the tank commanders, you're the ones who lead the platoons and the companies. What do we need to make you succeed on that battlefield? And when you have that virtuous collaboration, we will take off. So instead of what we are looking for now is demonstrations. We've also incentivized wargaming. Wargaming is as important as reading science fiction, because it allows operators to really get in there and do their thing. And they say, wow, I didn't really consider this before. So we've incentivized different types of war games. Right. We've incentivized different types of investments. And I would say, going back to your original question, how much time do we have? I believe that the sooner we get after this, the better.
I mean, that comes to the question of the change of administrations and needing to show that this has been a productive strategy, you know, so that it is credible with the next. And this is also a place where it seems that narrative and whether it's fiction or film plays a role as well, because you're showing what is possible. You know, is there a kind of a argument you're going to be trying to make, you know, as we get to the transition to whomever wins, you know, for this strategy in a way that says we are building towards this future. Here's what it looks like.
We're going to do this in one. We have three really complementary ways to go about this. First of all, you know, I'm going to be central to the transition, so I'm going to be able to personally talk with the transition team and explain to them what we have pursued and why we've pursued it, and let them make their own decisions. But one of the things we've done in our program is to put a lot of different options that they can pull levers on. So if they, for example, we used to believe railgun, which is firing hypervelocity projectiles, generally at 2 kilometers per second or above, we thought railguns were going to be something we were really going to go after. But it turns out that powder guns firing the same hypervelocity projectiles gets you almost as much as you would get out of the electromagnetic railgun. It's something we could do much faster. So we're going to say, look, we believe that this is the place where you want to put your money. But we're going to have enough money in there for both the electromagnetic railgun and the powder gun. So if the new administration says, no, really, the electromagnetic railgun is the way I want to go, knock yourself out. We've set you up for success. The second thing is you always, on these transitions from administration to administration, have to have a strong relationship with Congress. We've given presentations to both the HASC and the SASC. The HASC, especially right now, under the leadership of Chairman Thornberry, has really said we're committed to this. They were quite complimentary of it in open testimony, and they're going to try to help us, you know, make sure that this goes across administrations. And the third thing and most important thing is to try to convince the senior leadership, military leadership in the department, that regardless of what political leadership is there, this is something they need to pursue from an organizational perspective, an operational perspective, a leadership perspective, a recruiting perspective. So all three of those things we're working real hard on for the next 9 months.
They almost need a sci-fi reading list, I think.
I think, you know, you made me think a lot because of your title and what the way you're approaching this. The person who won your, I haven't been able to read the whole thing. I just received it this afternoon. I took a glance, and generally it's a story about after a war, an autonomous weapon that lay dormant and then suddenly woke up and went out and looked out and was trying to knock out a ship. I would say something failed there. Something failed in the battle network. Our envisioning of the battle network would never allow an autonomous weapon to suddenly wake up and just say, okay, I'm ready to go. But those questions, what's very good about the story is if we can't answer those questions to our political leaderships and our military leaders, they have to be able to trust. This is all about trust. Autonomy is nothing more than delegating the decision authority to an entity in the battle network. That's all it means. Sometimes you're going to want to delegate to a machine. Sometimes you want to delegate to a person. But in every case, those people are going to have certain parameters of what they can and cannot decide. So I'm interested in reading all of the entries because it really helps you think through how do you visualize this?
I'm going to read an excerpt of this story that Major Hansa wrote. It includes also press clippings from the year 2043, and that's what I'm actually going to read a couple of paragraphs of, if you'll indulge us for a minute, because it'll help the conversation. The headline is Hunting the Jakes and Jamies, Using Technology to Find Abandoned Weapons from the Last War. This is from Bruce Shireman of the San Francisco Chronicle, e-edition in 2043. It's nice to know the Chronicle still exists then. Dateline of Mountain View, California. It breaks my heart every time another ship gets hit, Autumn Bishop said, running her fingers over the image of the Ingrenhausen on the Common Hall monitor. It makes all of us want to finish our projects before any more lives are lost. Bishop is on a team at Google Labs that has been developing software to hunt for Chinese drones from the Taiwanese War. We're working hard to develop a process to hunt these drones down in their lairs, said team leader Laura Coleman from Google Labs. We're constantly pushing the boundaries of programming, trying to figure out what we can do to clear the ocean. Google has been a valued partner in working to sweep the oceans of the Chinese JQ-8s and JMI-4 series drones, commonly called Jakes and Jamies, said Colonel Thomas O'Hara, commander of the U.S. Army's 780th Cyber Brigade. And though the 780th is an Army unit, he said, we have overall lead on the project's programming line of effort, and Google's partnership has been invaluable. We've cleared over 36 drones from breakthroughs that were the direct result from our teams working side by side. What's nice about this example, and the reason why I highlighted this segment of the story, because it's both problem and solution in one fictional narrative. And I think that's actually something that some of the best works out there can do, and one of the great things about this story. But it also raises a really uncomfortable truth, and Max and I were talking about this, Max Brooks, who did the final judging, that the human response to something as horrifying as having Chinese drones undersea that are lost and resurface from time to time in the same way that in northern France you might have unexploded artillery from World War II, as you did in the last century. How do we ensure that there is a conversation, not just internally, but also with potential adversaries, so that we don't make mistakes like dumping a swarm into the ocean because you're desperate in wartime? Because we know that nations will do things that they wouldn't otherwise do when their back's against the wall.
Well, this is central to this upcoming competition that we're already in. We already know that the Russians and the Chinese are investing enormous sums in artificial intelligence, robotics, and autonomous systems. Our premise is that a young man and woman who's grown up in the I world in a democracy is going to have an inherent initial advantage in this competition.
How long do you think?
Well, let me go a little bit more, and then I'll try to answer. And the reason why is that our conception of our battle networks is about empowering the human, the creative spirit of the human. We like the fact that our junior NCOs, when communications go down, will make their own independent decisions based upon what they think that their commander would want to do. And our entire network, since you have to assume that your network will dissemble under cyber attack and electronic warfare attack, we therefore believe that our young men and women will have an inherent advantage. In an authoritarian regime, each individual can be viewed as an impediment to the decision made by the senior leaders. And we know the conception of the Soviet reconnaissance strike complex was totally automated. They were going to push the button and let the machines make the decision when and how and where to employ and how to do this. Whereas we have chat rooms, all sorts of things. So in this competition, where it will become uncomfortable for us is if our competitors go to Terminators and we are still operating where the machines are helping the humans, and it turns out that the Terminators are able to make decisions faster, even if they're bad, how will we respond? So in our society, we will debate the moral, political, legal, ethical. We will debate all of those things and decide when and where to delegate authority to unmanned systems. Our potential competitors may not. So this is something, I can't tell you how fast or how long this will be because it will depend upon how the competition unfolds. But I would say within the next decade or decade and a half, it's going to become clear when and where we delegate authority to machines. And you bring up things, August, on machine speed. Mm-hmm. And things like cyber attack, electronic warfare, missile defense. Humans simply cannot operate at the same speed as machines. And in those instances, we will delegate authority to the machine in defensive operations, trying to protect our force.
Even in cyber, where defense becomes offense pretty fast?
Absolutely. Hopefully you'll have learning machines that sense that we're under attack, blunt the attack, and immediately go on the counterattack without human intervention. And the same thing on electronic warfare. The same thing in missile defense. We already have it in the Aegis combat system. There's a totally autonomous mode where you press the button, it's called automatic mode, and the skipper of the ship and the tactical action officer with 60 inbound missiles are unable to be able to process how to engage that swarm if you would. And so the machine takes over. So there will be instances where we debate, primarily defensive, I think, because in the offensive role is where we'll be very careful. We believe there'll always be a human making the decision to employ lethal force in the offense.
You know, the integration of these technologies to give this capability, you talk about it as being something that we can be certain that we're better at it, but I am less confident that we can assume that an adversary like China will be worse at it, and in part because they evolve commercially, technologically, and process-wise, in part because they are a rising power. So talk a minute more about that assumption, and if there is more flexibility in that as being a predicate for advantage in this third offset context.
Good. We believe, we hypothesize, we believe we have 4 advantages as we start this competition. The first one is our people. The second one is our advanced level of jointness. In battle network versus battle network warfare, all of the services have to be connected. They all have to be able to understand what everyone's doing. You have to go cross-domain very quickly and seamlessly. And we believe our advanced level of jointness will give us an initial advantage. We believe that our ability to create these campaign-level battle networks, which we have demonstrated, gives us an initial advantage. And we believe that our allies and partners who that we can work with give us an initial advantage. So the only thing we say, August, is we believe we have 4 initial advantages. Mm-hmm. They may be fleeting. We have to be able, as I said, to prepare yourself for different ways in the competition and technological surprise. So the only thing we're willing to say is we have a hypothesis. We think we have 4 advantages as the competition starts, but we're not certain at all that they will last, and we're certainly not betting on it.
Let's go back to some of the science fiction you've been reading and the things you've been watching that have been, you know, part of the inspiration for how you think about this. Talk a bit more, if you were able to talk to like a cadet at West Point or a midshipman at Annapolis, what would you say to them? I want you to read, you know, this book. You know, Bolos you mentioned as being one that really connected because of the human barrier to the ultimate decision. That is something that I think that could resonate with a generation that is seeing more and more autonomy. You know, the rise of bots and social media, the cars that pick us up with our Uber apps will not have drivers in them before we know it.
Well, as I said, the one that really one that really captures my attention are the Bolos, but the thing that I would tell the young lieutenants and the ensigns, etc., is that in the future, I don't believe that the commander who listens to the machine all the time is going to be the best commander. Machines will give extraordinarily good options to the commander, and the machine will come out and say, recommend option A, battle computer. And it will be the humans who say no. So it's going to be like James T. Kirk on the Kobayashi Maru, right. You know, where he says, okay, I understand the rules of the game, but I'm going to change the rules of the game, and I'm not going to listen to the rules of the game. And I believe that you know, teaching our young lieutenants and ensigns from the very beginning that never, ever, ever believe that the computer is always going to be right. Trust your judgment, and then we have to train them to operate in there and to cheat, if necessary, right, against these things. There's all sorts of different movies that you watch where a learning machine like Chappie is learning with the environment and becoming more and more human as it goes along. We will be in those situations where humans are working with intelligent learning machines that can really replicate the environment in new and different ways. And being able to train your officers and your enlisted and your NCOs to interact with those, trust them. The more we can give them, you know, movies, books to read about those things, I think the better it will be.
You know, the expectations that we'll have access to this technology underpin a lot of the third offset, and just thinking about the future of war. You know, the short video we showed earlier about Ant Farm, you know, posited a future in which it's not evident necessarily from the short video, but the story says essentially AI has been walled off from military use. So what is the alternative? You can throw a lot of people at it, and you can gamify it, and you can make it integrated in the social media experience. which has, as we saw, a kind of a negative outcome. But how confident then are you that we will have access to these technologies? You saw recently in Switzerland the meeting to essentially check the utilization of robotics, for example, in militarized context. Where does that represent as an objective or an impediment, or is it actually a helpful part of the conversation?
Well, for democracies, we're going to have these debates, these moral, ethical, and legal debates, and it's very healthy, and we look forward to doing it. But this is very much like the telegraph, railroad, and rifle revolution in war, where the telegraph and the railroad were changing society. And that then changed the way we conducted warfare. And the amount of autonomy and artificial intelligence that is going to be in our daily lives. I mean, I just remember the first thing, AI, a narrow AI, cruise control. Keeps your car 55 miles an hour. The first ones, if you remember, weren't very good going up the hill. It's 55 and you go up a hill and would slow down. You'd go down the hill and you speed up. Now you have even better AI, and you stay right on 55. Doesn't matter what's going on, it'll stay pretty much right on AI. Then there were auditory cues for the driver, human-machine collaboration. Backup warning, hey, you're getting close to something, ding, 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 ding. Lane departure warnings, watch out, watch out, watch out, and the driver does it. But now we have AI where you press the button and it automatically parks. And now last night I watched a Passat commercial. I hope I can say that without getting into trouble. And it's saying autonomous braking system. It takes over from the driver, regardless of whether you're texting your daughter or calling your wife, or you're distracted because you're listening to Adele on carpool karaoke. And it takes over because it says, hey, dumbass, excuse me. I mean, I'm in trouble. Hey, dummy, there's something hard. You're about ready to quit, and it takes over. And so what will happen is it's changing all of our lives in ways where everyone will say, hey, we can trust AI in certain instances, and it will change war. And if we do not allow ourselves, if we self-censor ourselves out, or if we self-deter ourselves to operate in here, I guarantee you our adversaries are not going to do that.
I mean, there's an irony with cars. I think, I don't know how many of you are still people who care about cars anymore, but as cars get more technologically sophisticated, it's harder to relate to them emotionally. And I wonder about the experience, of service, how that will change as technology becomes more and more a part of military service. Will it not be the same because you're spending more time with a machine interacting that may be no different than some of the civilian technologies that it comes from? It may be quite familiar, to the same auto park technology. Or if in fact machines will be more like Her, the Joaquin Phoenix film, where you actually develop an attachment to an AI. That in fact has an attachment to every other customer of that service, or every other member of your platoon. This is a really kind of powerful force that we can't forget with machines.
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. There's a series, I think the author's name is Jack Slade, and it's about a person who can hear the communications of all AI. And so you have dumb AI, like a coffee maker, and the coffee maker, all it does is talk about what it does. And it talks to the refrigerator, and the refrigerator says, I'm so much smarter than you. He can hear all of this going on. And it's a very fascinating kind of glimpse in the future where you're surrounded by AI, and some are narrow AI that do specific things, some are more general AI that are smarter. And generally what will happen, I presume what will happen, is we will become much more attached to the general AI type of the ones that are more advanced. And I can easily see people getting attached. This is probably a terrible thing to all dog lovers, but you know how attached a canine handler becomes to their service dog. It is unbelievably close. Now imagine a robot dog that does everything that living dog did. It protects you from getting blown up by IEDs. It goes through the door first and takes the rounds for you. There's no doubt in my mind that soldier Marine is going to have an attachment to that machine. Right. And it will be different than having an attachment with a dog, but it will still be an attachment nonetheless, and probably very strong.
Our last creative challenge, one of the 6 that we've run for the project, was actually won by a woman who's a PhD candidate at MIT, Marika Landau-Wells, I'll give her a shout out here, with a story called Remote Operations, about that very relationship between a robot dog and their handler, because it really gets to that core question of relationship to emotional relationship with technology. This event ends at 5:30, so I want to make sure we get some questions in. I'm going to ask that you keep your questions to questions in kind of think tank rules here. And we'll be passing mics out because this is webcast. I'd like to ensure that those who are tracking us via web will have a chance to hear what you have to say. So we'll start with the gentleman right here.
Yes, I'm Randall Fort with Raytheon. Mr. Deputy Secretary, thank you. In our previous, just our previous session, we had a representative from Lockheed Skunk Works, and he pointed out that the first U.S. jet aircraft was basically from signed document to flying in about 140 days. And the contrast with the F-35 that's gone on a biblical generation of development was made. One of your predecessors just a few years ago, Bill Lynn, wrote an article about cyber, where he pointed out that it took DoD 81 months, 6.75 years, 3 to 5 Moore's Law cycles, to make a vanilla computer acquisition and implementation. So as you look at all this technology that you're talking about, which all sounds great, what about the acquisition cycles and the process of going from brilliant idea to getting things in people's hands? Are there going to be some reforms and some changes in ways in doing business and how you all acquire technology in the future?
Well, let me start with your example. Comparing the F-35 to the first fighter jet, let's call it the F-100, is just so incredibly wrong. I mean, I don't even call the F-35 a fighter. I call it a BN-35, a Battle Network 35. It is designed to plug that human into the battle network and through a distributed aperture system, suck up all the information around the plane and display it on the visor of a pilot. That is so far in advance in human-machine collaboration that, you know, putting that together has been an enormous undertaking. And I think what we did is we really shot for the moon, and we're finally getting there. It was slow, a lot slower than we would have liked. But it's going to be really an incredible battle network platform. But your point on, this goes back to this is a competitive strategy. We must get faster and better. We're talking about smaller numbers of prototypes, incentivized demonstrations of things which will allow us to say, oh, wow, this is really good. I hate to use the term spiral development because in a lot of instances now that's lost. It's now looked almost pejoratively. But being able to develop things faster, we are absolutely committed to do. The House and the Senate are both working hard with us to try to figure out how we can make things faster. Additive manufacturing, which was here, is going to allow us to do smaller production runs of things and allow us to test, we hope. So I'm right with you, and the whole department is right with you. And it's going to be important for us to get this right. And I think this has got the attention of Secretary Carter when he was AT&L, Better Buying Power 1.0. We've gone through 3.0. We still have a long way to go. But I take your point, and it's something we better get right or we're going to really regret it as this competition unfolds.
Right here.
Karen Erickson, Southern New Hampshire University. Whether you're talking about an autonomous sentient machine or whether you're talking about a collaboration between artificial and human intelligence, even when you talk about competitive instrumentalities, what the Russians or Chinese are developing, these are all means. So what war are you planning for? What kind of war are you thinking you might fight? What types of engagements are these going to be used for or developed for?
Well, the third offset strategy was originally conceived because we believed that the conventional deterrence versus our great power competitors was being undermined. Now, we define great power very simply. It is, we use John Mearsheimer's definition of great power, which is a country that can take on the dominant state, which is the United States conventionally, and which has a nuclear deterrent force that can survive a second strike. That's very good for the Department of Defense. It focuses on capabilities, not intentions. We don't get involved on whether or not their soft power is as big as ours, what the comprehensive national power is. It really focuses on capabilities and what we have to do to deter them. So the first instantiation is the worst thing that could happen is if we had a collision between nuclear armed great powers. And so focusing on conventional deterrence, making sure that that war never happens, was the first bit. But the battle network that really got us thinking about how this might go is the counterterrorism network that we set up over the last 14 years, which is clearly a collaboration of human and machines. And it is applicable in counterterrorism situations because learning machines will be able to figure out what the networks look like faster. They'll be able to identify targets that hopefully we will be able to attack, which will have the worst impact on the network. We believe it's totally applicable to hybrid warfare because learning machines, the little green men problem is a learning machine, big data analytics problem. We believe it's going to be very good for intelligence and warning. We believe it's going to be applicable across the full range of military operations. We're the Department of Defense. What we do is we organize, train, and equip our forces to win wars, but we operate forward to preserve the peace. So we hope that we will never have to use these technologies in any war. But if we do have a war, we're absolutely certain that they'll be applicable in anything we do.
Take a question from the back.
So I'm latching on to the point you said that sometimes we reveal as a form of deterrence, and building off her question, at war with whom, I suppose? So this morning there was some discussion about subnationals and ideological groups and asymmetric warfare, and that cyber, the barriers to entry to joining the nuclear club are clear. The barriers to entry to joining the cyber club, especially with our increased dependence in the private sector, are much, much lower. And we've even seen radicalized members of Anonymous join ISIS and get killed by drone strikes so far. How much of the strategy has to change for this notion of asymmetric warfare or non-nation states that can play in the same space?
Well, I'm going to answer this in the way we thought about fighting adversaries with conventional guided munitions. So you might say that, hey, an adversary has 11,000 guided missiles, and it sounds almost impossible to go up against. But then you look at things called salvo density rings. Range is still dependent on cost. And so if 9,000 of those missiles can only go 250 kilometers, and if you can operate at 300, then now you have a 2,000 missile problem. And if they have 50 that can go 700 kilometers and everything is less, if you can operate at 800, you can take it out. In the cyber world, you're going to have an awful lot of cyber capability, and you're going to be under attack every day. But if your AI and your learning machines can stop 90% of those attacks, and you only have to focus and make sure that the 10% that could really get through, that's the way you have to approach the competition. You want to get rid of all of the kind of people who can delve in this, but they either don't have the high-end learning machines that would allow them to crack into your network. So believe me, this is one of the big things. You asked, August, one of the biggest impediments we have is in this cyber world, if you throw into a network, are you putting yourself up to an enormous vulnerability? And we've talked with a lot of smart people. You can configure your network in different ways, but you have to be ready for the network to kind of disassemble and then people to operate on a local level. So on all of these cases on the lower end, we believe that many of them we will outmatch in terms of our learning machines. That may not be true. It may turn out that encryption and learning machines become so ubiquitous that every single person is a cyber ace. That's going to be a hard world to operate in, but right now we believe that we can operate in the world by getting rid of most of the competitors and just focusing on the high-end ones.
We're going to go for our last question to Steve Grundman, who's the Lund Fellow here at the Council and really the godfather of the Art of the Future project, who's also spearheading a lot of our work and outreach to Los Angeles as well. Steve.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Secretary, for coming to the Atlanta Council today. August has alluded to the anthology of short fiction that we curated last year, War Stories from the Future. And when I read through all the stories, hearkening again to the Frederick Pohl quote that it's science fiction is great not for envisioning the automobile, but the traffic jam. So the overriding traffic jam that I read through all of these stories took me a little by surprise. It's one of the good things about art and fiction. Is it revealed something I would never otherwise have thought about in my left brain, and that was the alienation of future soldiers, sailors, and airmen as a general matter, even from their, they become isolated and alienated. But then I connected that thought to a recurring theme from the whole day, which you wouldn't have had the advantage of being able to listen to. But that thought revolved a lot around the alienation from what David Brin, science fiction writer, would call the protector class from the rest of us, from the society. And I just wondered I wonder if this is something which those of you leadership in the Pentagon think about, talk about. This, I over-dramatize the matter perhaps by calling it an alienation, but this separation, not least from the networks of knowledge and ingenuity and integrity and grit that's out there in the larger society from our protector class that you are, for example, a steward of. Is this something that is a matter of discussion, policy, and if it's not, maybe there's one insight from art that could find a place in the third offset?
Well, to tell you the truth, we haven't really gotten that far along because we're trying to conceive of how this will unfold. And that's very important. We don't have an endpoint in this. This is very much a walk, crawl, run, see what we can do, how we train our people, how our people react. Once we start having operational and organizational constructs where we see how people, actually engage in this world, those type of discussions probably will be much more fulsome. But one of the things that I thought about after Ender's Game, which I didn't think was all that good of a movie, but it was a heck of a book, is in the future is having our younger and younger and younger commanders going to be the way that you go in this world. So I don't know. There's all sorts of different fascinating ways in which this can point out. But your bottom line point is exactly right. If this turns out to where soldiers and sailors and airmen, Marines are totally isolated and completely isolated from society and more comfortable dealing with machines than they are with a broader society, that will be a problem. I do want to say one thing because it didn't come up, August, is, and the crowdsourcing example is the thing that got me thinking about this. Just imagine what happened in the War of the Worlds when it was on the radio and it caused widespread panic. In this world, a War of the Worlds, as connected as we are, and the way that you can manipulate social media, and the way that you can have a major impact on the way lots of people think very hard about, we're going to have to think about that too. How an attack might, attack on our country might be just to cause social panic. Right. On a threat that really isn't coming.
And it doesn't have a kinetic response.
Doesn't have a kinetic response. So I applaud very much what you're trying to do. I look forward to reading all of the different inputs, and I'll try to read every single one. And hopefully I will get the same type of reaction, or have different reactions and things that I haven't thought about. So thank you very much for having me this afternoon. I've had a good time.
Thank you for joining us, for spending some time with us here. And for those who are listening online, thanks for joining us as well. You can find our project at artofthefuture.atlanticcouncil.org. You can read our contest winners. You can download for free our short story anthology. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary.
Thank you.
please stay seated for closing remarks?
So thanks again to the Deputy Secretary for spending some time with us and letting us listen in on his conversation with August. I thought that was a fascinating opportunity to get a chance to listen to how he's been thinking and how he's been trying to think about the third offset, something that in the Pentagon is is a topic of great discussion. Let me also say thank you to all of you for spending the day with us today, and I hope that you heard something new. I hope that you met someone new, whether it was in the audience or whether it was here on the stage. Thank you to those online who have tuned in or who are watching afterwards. I hope again you will find something a little bit different here. I have to thank our sponsors again, Lockheed Martin and Finmeccanica, for sponsoring an event that quite frankly is very different than the kind of events they usually sponsor, and for participating in this event as well. We purposely tried to make this not only a little different to stimulate some different thinking, but to hopefully reach out to new audiences. So if you are somewhat new to this discussion or somewhat new to this organization or somewhat new to this community, I hope you'll reach out to us and tell us what you thought about this and tell us what you're thinking and inject some new thinking into this process. August's project, really reaching out to the artistic community. I'm a big believer in really broad interdisciplinary studies really helping lead to breakthroughs in thinking. I don't know where those interdisciplinary thoughts are going to come from, which is why I invite, frankly, all comers to this discussion. Even with that very diverse approach and frankly, intentionally somewhat unfocused approach to bringing in speakers, I heard three really big themes resonating through every single panel and all the way through the end of the day. The first is we need vision. And to me, that's really about thinking longer term. We need to stop chasing rabbits, stop chasing the ticker across the bottom of the cable news screen, and we need to start thinking longer term. We need to balance that with the near term, but we can't lose sight of that longer term. Speaking of balance, the second thing I heard in every single panel was the need to understand the complexity we face and the need to find balance in that complexity rather than an effort to simplify and revert to dogma. And I heard that from multiple speakers today. And finally, particularly in the last panel, but again, I think through every single panel, what we heard is the absolute imperative for the need to take risks and for innovation. And that's something that I think many know that the strategy initiative here at the Atlantic Council is all about. I hope you got a little bit of a taste of it here at Global Strategy Forum 2016. I hope you'll come back in 2017 to see what we do with some of these ideas and more, including any ideas you might have for things that we should be doing at a conference like this. And I hope that you'll come back and tune into some of the events that you might have missed today and let us know what you've thought about them. We're really looking forward to your feedback on this. Just to let you know what else we're going to be doing, we are also having some smaller sessions this evening and tomorrow to get a more international perspective. You heard a lot of broad interdisciplinary, mostly American perspectives today. We'll be reaching out to an international community this evening. And tomorrow we'll also be reaching out to some of the top thinkers in strategy, both from government and in the private sector. You'll see some of that on our website. If you're interested, you'll see some contact information on how to find out more of those events. But thank you all very much. It's been a long day here. Thanks for sharing it with us. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.